I stood in my own doorway, dish towel still in my hands, as my daughter's words cut through the air sharper than any blade. "You're just waiting to rot in this house, Mom." The tea on the table went cold before I could answer. After raising her alone, after paying for every wall around us, I was no longer her mother, just the old woman taking up space in her home. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The house had been too quiet all morning. Diane moved through it like someone walking through a dream she no longer trusted, her slippers whispering against the tile, her breath slow and even. She set the table for 3, though she already knew that was a mistake. 2 plates would have been enough. Still, she laid out the third, smoothing the cloth napkin flat, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator that seemed louder than her own thoughts. Rebecca's voice broke through from the phone on the counter, sharp, brittle, too fast. "I told him I wasn't waiting another minute, Mom. You should have heard what he said." Diane half listened, half counted the silverware. The rhythm soothed her. Fork, knife, spoon, fold. Her daughter's voice blurred in and out, each word steeped in irritation. Rebecca's anger had a way of filling every room, even through a speaker. "Mom, are you even hearing me?" "Yes," Diane said softly, her tone as calm as tea cooling on the stove. "I'm listening, sweetheart." A car door slammed outside, then another. Diane turned toward the window just as the screen door creaked open. Rebecca swept into the house like a storm in heels, one hand still gripping her phone. Behind her, Trey followed, slower, careful not to meet Diane's eyes. Rebecca tossed her purse onto the couch. "He's impossible, Mom. Do you know what he said in the car?" "He said I—" She caught sight of the table. "Why are you setting it like that? It's weird." Diane pressed her palms together. "I thought you'd stay for lunch." "We're not staying." Rebecca's voice cracked at the edges. "I just came because you kept texting me. Let's talk. Come by." "Well, here I am." Trey shifted near the doorway, hands deep in his jacket pockets. "Maybe we should—" "Don't start," Rebecca cut in. "You don't get to play peacekeeper now." Silence thickened, stretching between them. Diane reached for the kettle and poured the water. Steam drifted, curling like pale ribbons. She set a cup in front of her daughter. "Sit down a moment," she said. "Have some tea before you go." Rebecca's eyes flashed. "Tea? Really, Mom? You're just waiting to rot in this place anyway. You think tea fixes anything?" The words hit harder than Rebecca meant them to. Diane blinked. Once, then again. Her fingers trembled against the porcelain, though she quickly steadied them. Trey looked away, staring at the half-open window where the wind tugged at the lace curtain. He muttered something under his breath, something that sounded like apology, but Diane didn't ask him to repeat it. From outside, a faint rustle. Arlene, the neighbor, was pretending to sweep her porch again. Her broom paused mid-air, eyes angled toward Diane's kitchen window. She was always watching, the neighborhood's self-appointed witness. Rebecca caught sight of her and groaned. "God, she's still out there? Doesn't she have a life?" "She means well," Diane said, though her voice lacked conviction. "People look after each other here." "Yeah," Rebecca snapped, "like vultures." The kettle clicked off behind them, a mechanical exhale that made the silence sharper. Diane sat slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "Rebecca," she began carefully, "you can be angry with me, but don't take it out on him." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "He's the reason I'm angry." Trey lifted his head then, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't lie to you." "Don't," Rebecca warned. "Don't you dare." "Enough," Diane said, not loudly but with enough force that the air seemed to shift. "You both need to stop before you say something you can't take back." Rebecca glared, tears bright in her eyes but never falling. Oh, I already did. She turned toward the door, shoulders squared, fury anchoring her steps. Trey hesitated, caught between staying and following. Diane didn't move to stop them. She just sat there, listening to the fading echo of footsteps, the screen door slamming once more, the sound of gravel scattering as a car engine roared to life. The quiet that followed was different now, heavier, alive with something unspoken. Diane looked at the teacups, one untouched, steam thinning into nothing. Outside, Arlene lowered her broom, eyes narrowing at the house across the yard. Diane whispered, almost to herself, that line. She'll wish she never said it. And then, very softly, she smiled. Mark's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet, the kind that always looked clean but never felt it underfoot. Sunlight from the wide front window cut across the framed diplomas on the wall, catching on the tiny flecks of dust that refused to stay gone. Diane sat on the edge of the chair opposite his desk, hands folded over her purse, her posture composed but stiff, like a woman holding herself together with string. Mark slid a folder toward her. So, he said, tapping the manila edge with a pen. I've gone through everything. Title, deed, tax assessments, utilities, all of it. Diane waited, her expression unreadable. It's all in your name, he continued. No shared ownership, no secondary signatures, no liens, nothing pending. You're the sole owner of the property. Her lips pressed together in a slow, measured line. The words should have sounded ordinary, but they felt like a verdict. Quiet. Final. Absolute. Across the desk, Cynthia, Mark's assistant, scrolled through something on a tablet. Even the utilities, she added, her tone matter-of-fact. Gas, electric, water. All registered solely under you, Mrs. Raines. Rebecca's name doesn't appear anywhere. Diane nodded faintly. Good, she murmured, more to herself than to them. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her. You want to tell me what this is really about? Because you already know what you own. You've known for years. Diane's eyes lifted to meet his. I want her out, she said. Without drama, without spectacle. A soft whir came from the ceiling fan above, the only sound for several seconds. Mark set his pen down. That can be done, he said carefully, but she's your daughter. This kind of thing can get complicated. She moved in after the divorce, Diane said, voice steady but quiet. It was supposed to be temporary. I let her use the guest room until she could get back on her feet. Mark flipped through the papers. Was there ever a lease? Any written agreement? Diane shook her head. No. I didn't think I needed one. Cynthia looked up from the tablet. You didn't. Legally, she's an occupant by permission, not a tenant, which means you can revoke that permission at any time. The statement landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Diane inhaled deeply, her chest rising, the sound almost lost beneath the hum of the fan. She let the breath go slow, deliberate, each second thinning the weight that had clung to her since that morning. Then that's what I'll do, she said softly. Mark hesitated. Diane, are you sure? Maybe you two could... No, she cut in gently, not unkindly. I've tried the other way. She needs to understand that some things aren't hers to take. Cynthia glanced at Mark, then back at Diane. We'll draft a notice for you to deliver, but once you hand it over, there's no turning back. Diane stood, smoothing the hem of her jacket. I don't intend to turn back. Her purse strap slid across her shoulder, the faint creak of leather punctuating the stillness. Mark nodded slowly, sliding a blank form toward Cynthia. Then we'll prepare it today. You can pick it up tomorrow morning. As Diane reached for the door, Mark's voice followed her. She's going to fight you on this, you know. Diane paused, hand on the handle. She can try, she said. When she stepped into the corridor, the sound of typewriter keys began behind her. Cynthia filling in the first few lines of the eviction notice. Each clack echoed like a heartbeat against the paneled walls. Outside, the sun had dropped lower, burning a pale gold across the courthouse lawn. Diane stopped for a moment beneath the flagpole, her reflection faint in the polished brass plaque by the steps. For the first time all week, her shoulders eased. Then, just as she turned toward her car, her phone buzzed. A new voicemail, Rebecca's number. She almost deleted it without listening. But the preview line caught her eye. "You think that house is yours alone?" Diane's thumb hovered over play. The wind tugged her hair across her cheek, whispering through the trees overhead. Her hand dropped to her side, phone still lit in her palm, the words burning on the screen. She didn't press play. Not yet. By late afternoon, the house had slipped back into its familiar stillness, the kind that made every sound a little louder, every motion a little more deliberate. The faint hum of the dishwasher masked the scrape of a chair, the clink of dishes left half-rinsed in the sink. Rebecca's coffee mug sat tilted on the counter, a lipstick smear dried along its rim. Two plates leaned precariously in the drying rack, each streaked with the dull sheen of grease. Diane stood over them, towel in hand, staring as if she might erase the entire scene by will alone. She had asked, more than once, for the kitchen to be kept clean. Quietly, politely. Rebecca never answered, just rolled her eyes, slipped out to her room, and let the silence finish the argument for her. Now, the air smelled faintly of burned toast and cheap perfume. Diane reached for the sponge, washed the dishes herself, and let the warm water sting her fingers until the irritation faded into something colder. When she finished, she wiped the counter, turned to set the towel back on its hook, and stopped. The hallway light was on. Rebecca's door, at the end of it, stood slightly open. She never left it open. Diane crossed the floor slowly, each footstep deliberate, her pulse quickening with something she didn't quite name. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume and something metallic beneath it. Faint, but unmistakable. The dresser drawers were half open, clothes spilling out in careless folds, and the small cedar jewelry box that had sat on the vanity for 30 years was pried open, its lock bent like a twisted rib. Diane moved closer. The top tray was empty. The place where her mother's wedding ring should have been, gone. A whisper of footsteps behind her. "Mrs. Raines?" Trey stood in the doorway, his face pale, eyes darting between her and the broken box. Diane straightened slowly. "When did she leave?" "About an hour ago," he said, voice tight. "She said she was meeting someone. I didn't. She told me not to." Diane's gaze didn't waver. "Did you see her take anything?" He shook his head quickly, then stopped, guilt flickering across his expression. She said, "You didn't need that ring anyway, that it was just collecting dust." Diane felt the air leave her chest in a slow, even breath. Her fingers brushed the splintered edge of the box. The silence between them thickened. "Trey," she said finally, "this isn't your fault." He blinked, startled. "She's angry," Diane continued. Her tone softer now, more measured. "And she wants someone to join her in it. Don't let that be you." He nodded once, throat tight, eyes glistening with something that might have been shame or relief. A gentle knock at the front door broke the moment. Diane turned. Through the window she saw Arlene standing on the porch, a small foil-covered tray balanced on one arm. "Come in, Arlene," Diane called, her voice carrying down the hall. Arlene stepped inside, eyes sweeping the room with that nosy blend of curiosity and concern that Diane had come to expect. "I brought you some lemon cake," she said brightly, "and I brought something else, too." She dug into her purse and handed over a worn business card. "Locksmith, real good one," Changed mine after Harold passed. Comes quick. Doesn't charge extra if it's personal. Diane studied the card, thumb tracing the embossed letters. Thank you, she said quietly. Arlene tilted her head, lowering her voice. You okay, hon? You look like you seen a ghost. Diane smiled faintly, almost kind. Not a ghost. Just something I should have seen sooner. Arlene hesitated, then set the tray down on the counter. You call that locksmith, all right? You don't let anyone make you feel unsafe in your own home. When the door closed again, Diane stood still for a long time. The evening light slanted across the hallway, soft and golden, touching the edge of the broken jewelry box. She picked up her phone, the locksmith's card beside it, and dialed the number printed in clean black ink. A man's voice answered on the second ring. Yes, she said. Tomorrow morning. Change every lock. She hung up, placed the card beside the lemon cake, and turned off the kitchen light. In the dark reflection of the window, she saw herself, still, silent, and smiling just enough to make it unclear whether it was relief or something else entirely. Then the faint sound of a car door shutting outside made her pause. Headlights flashed once across the yard. Rebecca was home early. The locksmith's van pulled into the driveway just after 8. Morning light rolled across the grass, soft and cold, carrying the smell of wet earth from last night's rain. Diane stood at the window, arms folded loosely, watching the man step out. Mid-40s, tall, wearing a gray work shirt with a stitched name tag that read, Vince. He carried his tools like someone who'd done this too many times to think about it. She opened the front door before he could knock. You're early, she said. Traffic was light, he replied, voice low, easy. Won't take long. He moved through the doorway without hesitation, studying the frame, the hinges, the weathered brass knob Rebecca had once slammed hard enough to rattle the glass in its pain. Diane stepped aside, letting him work. The sharp whir of the drill broke the morning quiet. Bits of metal dust sprinkled the welcome mat. The sound was efficient, controlled, rhythmic. Diane found herself listening not just to the drill, but to the silence that followed each burst, as if the house were taking small, measured breaths. Vince worked methodically, saying little. When he finished the front door, he gestured toward the kitchen. Back entrance next. She nodded, leading him through. The path took them past the table where Rebecca had once thrown her purse, past the empty coffee mug that still waited on the counter like an accusation. The kitchen door opened to the backyard, the hinges whining faintly. Morning sun spilled in, highlighting the scuffed floorboards. Vince knelt and went to work again, 2 screws out, new lock in, the old brass cylinder placed neatly beside his toolbox. All set, he said after half an hour, standing and testing the latch. New tumbler, deadbolt, and reinforcement plate. This one won't give easy. Diane took the single key he handed her, the small metal weight cool against her palm. She closed her fingers over it. How many copies? Just this one. Unless you want extras. Her gaze held steady. No. Just the one. He nodded. Then we're done here. After he left, the house seemed to breathe differently. The air felt lighter somehow, less cluttered. She locked both doors twice, hearing the clean click each time. A new rhythm, one she trusted. In her bedroom, the morning light reached across the comforter, touching the edge of her nightstand. Diane opened the top drawer, slipped the new key inside and closed it gently. Her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. Composed, still, but something behind her gaze had shifted. The computer pinged from across the room. A new email. Cynthia. Subject. Updated occupancy form filed. Diane clicked it open. Everything's been processed. You're now listed as the sole occupant. Records updated in county database. Congratulations, Mrs. Raines. A soft, soundless laugh escaped her. Not amusement. Something closer to relief. She deleted the message, cleared her inbox, and leaned back in the chair. Through the window, she saw movement. Arlene on her porch, watering her geraniums in her robe. The old woman waved once, a garden hose in one hand, coffee mug in the other. New locks? Arlene called across the yard. Diane nodded. Arlene smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. Good. That's what peace sounds like. Diane smiled back faintly, then turned away before the conversation could stretch into anything longer. She had no interest in explaining what peace really sounded like, because it wasn't silence. It was the steady pulse beneath it, the one that told you something was finally yours again. She tied up the kitchen trash, Rebecca's crumpled receipts, old takeout boxes, a lipstick-stained napkin, and carried the bag outside. The air was warm now, sunlight just beginning to press through the clouds. She dropped the bag into the bin, the lid closing with a hollow echo. As she turned back toward the house, a faint vibration buzzed in her pocket. Her phone. Voicemail. Too new. The screen showed Rebecca's number again. 2 messages, both from last night. Diane's thumb hovered over the icon. For a moment she considered deleting them without listening, just as before. But then, through the window, she caught her reflection, the faint trace of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She unlocked the phone and pressed play. Static filled the air for a moment, then Rebecca's voice, low, ragged, whispering through the line. Mom, you shouldn't have done that. The message ended there. Diane stared at the phone until the second message began automatically. Same number, but a different tone this time. Quieter, more deliberate. I'll be there soon, Rebecca said, and I'm not knocking. The message clicked off. Diane's pulse slowed, not quickened. She slipped the phone into her pocket, walked to the front door, and tested the new lock one more time. The key turned smooth, silent. Outside, Arlene's hose water hissed across the porch steps like rain. Inside, Diane whispered, "We'll see about that." And then, very slowly, she locked it again. The pounding started just after noon, sharp, furious knocks that rattled the frosted glass in the front door. Diane froze halfway through folding the laundry, her hand hovering over a towel. "Mom!" Rebecca's voice, muffled but unmistakable, sliced through the air. "Are you serious right now?" Diane set the towel down, smoothed it flat, and walked toward the window. The curtains trembled as she pulled one edge aside. Outside, Rebecca stood on the porch, hair wild, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, fury making her movements jagged. "Mom!" Another knock, louder this time. "Open the damn door." Diane said nothing. She only met her daughter's eyes through the glass. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Rebecca stepped closer, palms slapping the door. "You're locking out your own daughter?" Diane's voice, when it came, was calm, eerily so. "No," she said, loud enough to carry through the pain. "I'm evicting an adult tenant without a lease." Rebecca's jaw dropped, disbelief flashing across her face before anger swallowed it whole. "That's cute. You think this is legal? I live here." "Not anymore." Rebecca glanced toward the street, then back to the window. "You can't do this, Mom. You can't just—" Diane turned away from the glass, cutting her off without a word. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the sink as the pounding resumed. Harder now, desperate, echoing down the hall like gunfire. "You want to play games?" Rebecca shouted. "Fine, I'll call the cops." Diane took a slow sip of water, the coolness sliding down her throat like a quiet answer. Then she set the glass down and looked at her phone on the counter. The call had already been made 10 minutes ago. Outside, Rebecca's voice cracked, her anger thinning into something more fragile. "Mom, come on. You're being insane. Let me in." No reply. The doorbell rang. 3 rapid presses. Then silence. For the first time all afternoon, Diane felt the rhythm of her own heartbeat steady. She walked to the front window again, just as a black and white cruiser rolled to a stop by the curb. 2 officers stepped out. One young, clean-shaven, the other older, heavier around the shoulders. His tone already resigned. Rebecca rushed toward them, waving her phone. "She locked me out! My own mother locked me out of my house." The younger officer looked toward Diane's window. She drew the curtain back just enough to meet his eyes. He nodded politely, then motioned to Rebecca to step aside. The older officer approached the porch, his radio murmuring faintly at his shoulder. "Ma'am?" he called through the door. "Would you mind opening up for a quick word?" Diane hesitated only long enough to engage the chain lock before opening the door a few inches. "Yes, officer?" "Your daughter's concerned she's been locked out." "That's correct," Diane said. "Her occupancy was temporary. She has no lease, no legal claim. I've already filed notice with the county." The officer nodded, taking in her tone, her steadiness, the lack of panic. "Do you have documentation?" Diane handed a single sheet through the gap, the printed copy of the notice Cynthia had emailed. "Filed yesterday morning." He skimmed it quickly, then looked toward his partner. "Civil matter," he said quietly. "Not criminal." Rebecca's voice rose from the yard. "What's that supposed to mean? She can't just throw me out." "Ma'am," the younger officer said gently, "she can, if she's the sole owner and there's no tenancy agreement. That's something for civil court, not us." Rebecca's face crumpled, fury and disbelief colliding in the same breath. "You're siding with her?" "Nobody's siding with anyone," the older one said. "We're just making sure nobody gets hurt today." Rebecca turned back to the door, tears cutting sharp lines through her makeup. "You can't just erase me from this house, Mom." Diane's eyes softened, but her voice didn't. "I'm not erasing you. I'm reminding you, it was never yours." For a long moment, Rebecca stood frozen, her hand pressed to the glass like she might push through it by will alone. Then she stepped back, trembling. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "I already did," Diane replied. The officers lingered a moment longer, murmuring something Diane couldn't hear. Then the cruiser pulled away, leaving Rebecca standing alone on the sidewalk, her duffel bag at her feet, the wind teasing at her hair. Diane closed the door slowly, the latch clicking home with a sound that was neither loud nor soft, just final. From the porch, there came the faintest scrape, a zipper opening. Diane peered through the peephole. Rebecca knelt by the doorframe, pulling something small and metal from her bag. A key. Not the new one. Her old one. Rebecca slid it into the lock and twisted. It didn't turn. The click of failure echoed through the still house, followed by a low, shaking breath outside. Then Rebecca laughed. Quietly. Bitterly. "All right, Mom," she whispered, barely audible through the door. Round 2. By the next morning, the storm had gone digital. Diane woke to the chime of notifications, each one a quiet flicker of intrusion. Her phone screen glowed on the nightstand. Facebook, Instagram, a platform she never used but still somehow had an account on. All of them carrying the same name in bold at the top, Rebecca Rains. The first post was a photo of the house, her house, taken from the curb. The caption read, "Imagine being locked out by your own mother. Elder abuse goes both ways." Beneath it, the comments spread like weeds. "She can't do that. Call adult services. There's always another side to the story." Diane scrolled slowly, her expression flat, her heartbeat steady. She didn't reply, didn't even sigh. She just set the phone down, rose, and made the bed with precise, even folds. The day had begun, and she had things to do. The knock at the door came mid-morning, lighter than Rebecca's pounding the day before. Diane opened it to find Arlene holding her own phone like evidence in a trial. "I'm sorry, honey," Arlene said, voice trembling between concern and gossip. "But you need to see this." She turned the screen toward Diane. Screenshot after screenshot filled the gallery. Rebecca's posts had multiplied overnight. Accusations, hashtags, even a video where her voice shook just enough to sound convincing. "My mother's 70, and she's locking me out to keep my inheritance. I have nowhere to go. She's not well. Elder abuse is real." Arlene exhaled. "It's spreading fast. Half the town's seen it. You want me to say something?" "No." Diane's tone was calm, deliberate. "Don't feed it." Arlene's eyes softened. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," Diane said. "But thank you for showing me." When Arlene left, Diane shut the door gently, then crossed to her desk. She opened her email, attached the screenshots she'd taken herself, and typed a short message to Mark. Subject: Defamation warning. Mark, please see attached images regarding Rebecca's latest actions. Proceed accordingly. Dr. She hit send and waited only a few minutes before his reply appeared. Subject: Defamation understood. Cynthia's expediting the civil order. Sit tight. Don't engage online. The efficiency comforted her. Mark never wasted words. He understood that silence, in the right hands, was a weapon sharper than any public defense. The rest of the morning unfolded in precise movements. Coffee, dishes, a call from Cynthia confirming the filing number. Diane took notes on a yellow pad, her handwriting small and perfect. Once the injunctions approved, Cynthia said through the speakerphone, she'll be required to take the posts down, and if she doesn't, we'll have grounds for damages. Thank you, dear, Diane replied. And make sure Trey isn't named in any of it. There was a pause on the line. He hasn't said much, has he? No, Diane said. That's why I'm not angry with him. When the call ended, Diane walked down the hall toward the guest room. The door was open just enough to let in a beam of sunlight that stretched across the unmade bed. She stood there a long time before stepping inside. The pillow still held the faintest dent from Trey's last visit. His jacket, forgotten or maybe left on purpose, hung over the back of a chair. She lifted it, folded it neatly, and placed it at the foot of the bed. Then she began remaking the bed itself, smoothing the sheets, tucking the corners just so. Just in case, she murmured. Down the hall, the phone buzzed again. Another email from Cynthia. Subject: filed. Protective order. Emergency status granted. Attached was a PDF stamped with the county seal. Diane opened it, scanned the text, and allowed herself one long, measured breath. Outside, Arlene's voice carried faintly from her porch, talking to someone on the phone, probably spreading the news before the ink was dry. Diane didn't mind. Let the town whisper. Let Rebecca rage. Paper spoke louder than either. The afternoon light dimmed as a cloud crossed the sun, shadows sliding across the hallway like water. Diane set her reading glasses on the desk and turned off the lamp. But as she passed the living room window, something caught her eye. Across the street, a car she didn't recognize sat idling. The driver's window was cracked just enough to see the outline of a hand holding a phone, camera aimed toward the house. Her house. Diane stood perfectly still, her hand tightening on the back of the couch. The car didn't move. Then the flash blinked. Once, quick as a heartbeat. She reached for her own phone, thumb hovering over the call log. The number she'd dialed most recently glowed on the screen. Mark. But after a moment, she didn't press it. Instead, she lowered the blinds, one slat at a time, until the house was wrapped in shadow again. And in that quiet darkness, she smiled. Keep recording, she whispered. The file works both ways. The courtroom smelled faintly of floor polish and paper, sterile, heavy with other people's battles. Diane sat at the petitioner's table beside Mark, her posture perfectly straight, her hands folded loosely around a single pen she hadn't once used. The steady hum of conversation filled the air, the low murmur of voices blending with the shuffle of heels and the mechanical cough of the ceiling vent. Rebecca arrived 10 minutes late, her heels clicking like accusations across the tile. She wore too much perfume and an expression that tried to be composed, but couldn't quite hide the exhaustion beneath. A stack of printed emails clutched in one hand, a phone in the other. She took her seat opposite her mother and refused to look at her. Mark leaned slightly toward Diane. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "I'll handle this." Diane didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her calm had already settled around her like armor. The bailiff called the room to order and the judge entered, middle-aged, glasses low on his nose, the kind of man who had seen every version of regret imaginable. "Rains versus Rains," he read aloud, scanning the docket. "Family occupancy dispute." Rebecca's lawyer, young, eager, a little too sure of himself, stood first. "Your Honor, my client has been unfairly removed from her residence without due notice or humane consideration. The petitioner, her mother, has taken unilateral steps that amount to constructive eviction." The judge glanced at Diane. "You filed the occupancy order, ma'am?" "I did," she replied softly. Rebecca leaned forward, sliding her printed papers onto the table. "She's been planning this for months," she blurted. "Emails, forms. She's pretending to be rational, but she's not. She's—" Her lawyer touched her arm, a subtle plea for silence. It didn't work. "She doesn't care about family. She's obsessed with control." Mark rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, may I respond?" The judge nodded. Mark's voice carried the confidence of routine and truth. "Mrs. Rains is the sole owner of the property. Here are the title documents, the tax filings, and correspondence confirming that Ms. Rebecca Rains's occupancy was temporary and permissive only." He placed each folder on the bench like a line of defense. "Additionally, we've included a record of disturbances, both verbal and digital, that substantiate Mrs. Rains's request for court affirmation." The judge flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. The rustle of paper filled the silence. Rebecca crossed her arms, muttering under her breath. "This is insane." Mark continued evenly. "There's been no harassment, no unlawful eviction. Only a request for peace within her own home." Finally, the judge turned to Diane. "Mrs. Rains, is there anything you'd like to add before I rule?" For the first time all morning, Diane lifted her gaze fully to meet his. Her voice was soft, steady. "I have boundaries," she said. "That's all." The simplicity of it hung in the air longer than anything else spoken that day. The judge adjusted his glasses, exhaled through his nose, and nodded once. "The court recognizes full property ownership under Mrs. Diane Rains. Ms. Rebecca Rains has 14 days to vacate the premises and remove her personal effects. This matter is closed." The gavel struck wood. Clean, final. The sound hadn't even faded before Rebecca's chair scraped backward. "You can't do this," she shouted, standing so quickly her papers spilled across the floor. "You can't just erase me." "Ms. Rains," the judge warned, tone firm but tired. Rebecca grabbed her purse from the bench and hurled it toward the table. It hit the floor between them with a dull, violent thud. "She's sick," she screamed. "You'll see. She's not done yet." The bailiff stepped forward, one hand out. "Ma'am, that's enough." But Rebecca didn't stop. "You think this fixes anything, Mom? You think a piece of paper makes you safe?" Diane didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Mark quietly bent down to retrieve the fallen purse, setting it on the table between them. "We're finished here," he said to the bailiff. Rebecca stood shaking, chest heaving, eyes wild with betrayal. Then, realizing no one would save her, not the lawyer, not the judge, she spun on her. heel, and stormed out, the door slamming behind her like a closing chapter. The echo lingered, hollow and long. Mark gathered the paperwork. That went about as well as it could, he said. Diane rose from her chair, smoothing the sleeve of her jacket. I know. As they stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Through the high window, the afternoon sun burned white against the courthouse glass. Diane paused at the door, looking out across the parking lot. Rebecca's car was still there. Driver's door open, engine running, exhaust curling in thin gray ribbons. But Rebecca wasn't inside. Diane's expression didn't change, though the faintest crease appeared between her brows. Mark noticed. Everything all right? She turned slowly toward him, her voice almost a whisper. She didn't drive herself here. The 14 days passed like smoke, thin, restless, and full of waiting. Rebecca never came to collect her things, not once. She sent messages instead, short, clipped texts that arrived at odd hours. I'll be there soon. Stop touching my stuff. You don't get to decide when I leave. Diane read each one exactly once, then deleted it. She didn't respond. On the 15th morning, she made coffee, fed the cat, and called the movers. Nothing complicated, she told them. One bedroom, personal effects only. Bag and tag what's hers. Leave the rest. The truck arrived before noon. 2 men in work boots and blue shirts stepped out, their faces neutral, professional. Diane opened the front door without a word. Ma'am, one of them said, glancing around the hall. Which room? The one at the end, she replied. The door with the chipped frame. They nodded and got to work. Boxes unfolding, tape hissing, the quiet rhythm of a process meant to be impersonal. Diane stood aside, hands clasped, watching as her daughter's life was folded, sealed, and labeled in black marker, clothes, books, miscellaneous. Arlene showed up halfway through, wearing gardening gloves and carrying a small speaker that played soft gospel music. You sure you want to do this yourself, honey? She asked, setting the speaker on the counter. I could use a distraction from my own mess. Diane smiled faintly. Help if you'd like. Gloves are a good idea. Arlene hummed along to the music as she wrapped picture frames in old newspaper. She'll be mad, she said quietly. But maybe that's what it takes. She's been mad for years, Diane replied. Now she can just be mad somewhere else. By mid-afternoon, the room was bare. Walls pale where sunlight hadn't touched them in years. Carpet dented in the shape of old furniture. The jewelry box was gone. The mirror was gone. Even the air felt different, lighter, as if the house had exhaled. Diane tipped the movers generously. Stack everything in the driveway, she instructed. She'll know it's hers. They nodded again, respectful, efficient. When they left, the truck's engine faded down the street, replaced by the distant whine of cicadas and the steady creak of Arlene's rocking chair next door. Trey arrived just after 4. Diane hadn't expected him. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, eyes moving from the empty hallway to the boxes outside. Plastic wrap glistened in the afternoon light, fluttering faintly in the wind. You did it, he said quietly. Diane met his gaze. The court did it. I just followed through. He looked away, jaw tight. She's not gonna take this well. She never does. He nodded slowly, stepping closer to one of the boxes near the porch. His name was written on none of them, but his fingers brushed the plastic like he recognized each shape beneath. Mom's. She's different now, he said. You might have started something she can't stop. Diane's tone softened. I started nothing. I'm finishing it. Trey didn't argue. He just looked at her one last time, as if memorizing the stillness she carried like a second skin. Then he left. Walking, not driving, his figure shrinking down the street until it disappeared behind the elm trees. The air cooled as the sun began to drop. By early evening, the boxes sat neatly stacked in the driveway, covered in plastic sheeting to protect them from the dew. Diane stood at the front window, watching them. Arlene had gone home. The neighborhood was quiet again. At 7, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the calm. Rebecca's car pulled up fast, headlights glaring against the siding. She slammed the door and stared at the pile. 8 boxes, 2 suitcases, a small chest of drawers wrapped tight like something restrained. Diane stayed inside, behind the curtain. Rebecca tore at the plastic, muttering curses under her breath, flinging open lids and tossing things aside. Shoes, framed photos, clothes still smelling faintly of her perfume. Then she froze. Her eyes landed on the bright yellow sticker taped across the front door, bold black letters under the county seal. Notice of vacancy. Court ordered. She stumbled backward, staring at it, her face draining of color. For a long moment she didn't move at all. Then her hands began to tremble. Inside, Diane watched her daughter through the glass. She didn't feel triumph. Not really. Just something heavier. Something like finality. Rebecca backed away from the porch, her breathing uneven. Then, slowly, she lifted her phone, aimed it at the door, and began recording. Diane stepped out of the frame, letting the curtain fall shut. The house fell quiet again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of gospel music still playing softly from Arlene's porch next door. His eye is on the sparrow. Diane turned off the living room light and stood in the dark. Through the thin crack of the curtain, she saw Rebecca's silhouette still standing by the case boxes, her phone light cutting a small cold circle through the dusk. Then Rebecca said something Diane couldn't hear, but her mouth formed one word clearly: war. And with that, she dropped the phone, kicked over the nearest box, and disappeared into the night. The bank smelled like cold air and copy paper. Diane stepped through the revolving door just before 10, her flats making soft, precise clicks across the polished tile. She carried a manila folder under one arm, edges worn, tabs sticking out like teeth. Inside, the deed, the trust documents, and a copy of the court order no one dared question anymore. Mark met her at the front. Same trim beard, same overstarched collar. He looked tired, but the respectful kind of tired, like someone who'd been through enough to know not to ask unnecessary questions. "Conference room C," he said, gesturing toward the hallway. "She's already in there." Arlene sat with her gloves in her lap, glasses pushed high on her nose. Her church dress was too formal for a weekday, but Diane understood. It was a funeral of sorts. "Morning, honey," Arlene said softly. "You ready?" Diane nodded. "Let's finish it." Mark slid the documents across the table with the same care someone might use handling a newborn. "This names your son, Trey Harrison, sole beneficiary of the home under the new irrevocable trust," he said. "No changes can be made without his signature once this is filed. No claims, no contest." Diane signed. Her pen moved with precision, looping her initials, underlining finality. "Second page," Mark said, his tone even. "Just confirming transfer of title into the trust itself." Another signature, another date. He turned the pages toward Arlene. "Witness, please." She leaned forward, her hand steady despite the ache in her knuckles. "A mother protects," she whispered, not to anyone in particular. "That's just the job." Mark pressed the last stamp onto the page with a sharp click. Red ink. Final. "You've officially locked it all down," he said. Diane exhaled slowly. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like putting on armor. That afternoon, Rebecca's motion landed in the court queue like a firecracker with a soggy fuse. Urgent, loud, but destined to fizzle. The clerk didn't even flinch when he read it. "Motion to reverse lawful eviction," the top line read. "Filed pro se, full of typos and rage." Attached were photos, blurry, slanted shots of boxes, of the porch, of the notice on the door, a screenshot of Diane's name on a utility bill, a time-stamped video of Rebecca muttering, "This is illegal," into the wind. By 4 p.m., the order came down. Motion denied. Filed too late, relief not warranted. 2 lines, no hearing. The voicemail came at 6:03 p.m. Diane stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a wine glass she hadn't used. Her phone buzzed on the counter 3 times, then silence. No message alert, no preview text, just the red dot. She pressed play. Rebecca's voice slithered through the speaker, low and flat. "You'll die alone," she said. No rage, no crying, just that. A whisper meant to rot. Diane didn't flinch. She turned off the water, dried the glass, set it back in the cabinet. Outside, the wind picked up. Arlene's chimes danced faintly on the porch next door. At midnight, Trey called. "I heard," he said, "about the trust." Diane waited. "She's gonna lose her mind when she finds out." "She already did," Diane replied. There was a pause. Quiet breathing. A flicker of guilt, maybe. "I didn't ask for any of this," Trey said. "I know," she answered. "That's why you got it." Another silence, this one heavier. "I don't know if she'll ever stop," he said. "You know that, right?" Diane looked out the window. The boxes were gone now. Only faint lines in the driveway remained. "She will," Diane said. "Or she'll burn herself down trying." A car passed slowly outside, then another. Diane narrowed her eyes. A third car. Same speed, same hesitation at the curb. She turned off the lamp, stepped back from the window. Her pulse stayed even, but something twisted in her chest. She checked the locks. All 3, deadbolt, chain, slide bar. Still, she couldn't shake it. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, a text. Unknown number. No name. Just a picture. It showed the outside of her house, taken from the edge of her yard. Porch light on, her curtains drawn, and in the bottom corner, barely visible, a hand pressed to the window. Her window. Diane stepped back into the dark. The letter came in a plain white envelope, postmarked from a town Diane didn't recognize, somewhere flat and forgettable in the middle of Nevada. The handwriting on the front was slanted and familiar, like it had once belonged to someone who loved her. Diane found it in the mailbox on a Friday morning, tucked between a hardware store flyer and a coupon packet. No return address, just her name. Nothing more. She didn't open it right away. She carried it into the house like it might bleed, set it on the kitchen counter, and went about her morning in careful silence, feeding the cat, running a rinse cycle, watering the stubborn fern by the sink. When she finally slit the envelope open, the paper inside was folded too many times, creased with the kind of tension you can't iron out. "Mom, you made this happen. You always did." No apology, no softness, just lines of accusation strung together like barbed wire. Words sharp enough to nick, but hollow enough to echo. She read the letter once, top to bottom. No rereading, no dissecting. Then she folded it back up with the same cold care she might use closing the lid on an empty jewelry box. She lit the fireplace, struck a match, and fed the paper to the flames. The letter curled black at the edges and vanished into itself. Diane didn't cry. She watched it burn like someone watching rain on the horizon, too far to reach her anymore. Saturday, she signed up to volunteer at the library. There was a notice board near the front desk, paperbacks arranged by author, children's art stapled to cork. She wrote her name on the clipboard beside adult literacy support and circled Thursday afternoons. The librarian, a woman named Nora with a short silver bob and laugh lines around her eyes, looked up from the counter. "You're Diane Harrison, right?" Diane paused, surprised. My cousin handled your eviction case, Nora said. Said you were calm as a saint while the other party screamed the walls down. Diane gave a faint smile. Guess we all choose our noise. Nora nodded. We'll be lucky to have you. A week passed. Then two. The mailbox started to fill with something new. At first, it was just a single folded page. No envelope. A sketch in pencil. A cat curled in a windowsill. Tiny initials tucked into the corner. TH. Then another. A few days later. A garden trowel in an open hand. The lines were bold, intentional, thoughtful. By the third sketch, a worn-out chair with a teacup on the armrest, Diane smiled. She didn't mention it when Trey called. She just listened to him talk about his new apartment, the leak in the ceiling he was learning to live with, the way silence made him nervous. You'll get used to it, she said. I don't know, he replied. Feels different when it's the right kind. Sunday, Arlene made too much food again. I warned you I was frying bacon, she said, waving Diane into the kitchen. You show up hungry or you're getting judged. Diane laughed, something real and sudden. The kitchen table was covered. Casserole dishes, scrambled eggs, a fruit tray with more ambition than success. Arlene moved like someone finally untethered. Apron smudged with flour, lipstick uneven. Midway through the meal, she refilled Diane's coffee and leaned in with a sly grin. So, she said, how's freedom taste? Diane looked around the room, sunlight in the windows, the clink of forks, the absence of tension so wide it almost startled her. Like quiet, she said. Arlene tapped her mug to that. Hard-earned. Later that afternoon, Diane walked the length of her backyard. The grass had grown too high near the fence line, and she made a mental note to trim it before the week was out. A wind picked up, gentle at first, then stronger. It carried leaves across the lawn, rattled the porch swing, tugged at her sleeves like fingers. She paused when she saw it, wedged in the slats of the back gate. A new drawing. No envelope. Just pencil on thick paper, edges curled. This one was different. It showed her house from the street. Lights on in the window. Curtains pulled halfway back. A lone figure in the living room, standing still. But not alone. Another figure stood just outside the frame, barely drawn, like someone watching. Not Trey. No, initials. Just a line across the bottom in block letters. Still here. Diane's hand tightened around the page. She looked up, toward the gate, the street, the silence pressing in. And then she turned slowly, her back straight, her eyes steady, and walked toward the house. By the end of September, the weather shifted. Mornings came crisp and brittle, and Diane began wearing her sweaters again. The soft ones, the ones that didn't ask for attention. The messages started that same week. Not from Rebecca directly. She was smarter than that. They came through other people, names Diane hadn't seen pop up in years. First it was Joan, a woman from the church Diane no longer attended. Hi, sweetie, just checking in. Heard there's been some family tension. Be good to reconnect. Maybe coffee? Then came a ping from a shared number in a parenting group she'd left back in 2009. Hope this is still Diane's number. Ran into Becca. She looked rough. Thought you should know. Even one of the high school teachers reached out. Hey, don't mean to pry, but I got a long voicemail from Rebecca. She sounded lost. Said she misses home. Said she's sorry. Kinda. Diane read each message in silence, the same way she used to check the oven. Quickly, cautiously, with one hand on the dial in case the heat flared. She didn't reply. Not a single word. She deleted them. Slowly. Deliberately. Then she opened the settings on her phone and blocked every one. It felt like closing windows before a storm, even if the sky looked clear. Arlene stopped by 2 days later, holding a pie she hadn't baked and a smirk she absolutely had. "I hope you charged rent for the drama," she said, as she plopped onto the couch, setting the store-bought box on Diane's lap. "That girl owes back pay in emotional damages." Diane chuckled, the sound dry and warm. "She's resourceful," she said. "I'll give her that." Arlene rolled her eyes. "She's a full-time job with no paycheck and worse benefits." They sat in companionable silence as the cat nestled between them, tail twitching. Outside, the wind had started pushing the first golden leaves off the trees. Trey came by on Friday, arms full of brown paper bags, and a look in his eyes that said, "Stay a while." He'd taken to visiting once a week now, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with cookies he claimed were homemade, but clearly weren't. This time he brought peanut butter blondies and a story about a neighbor who'd set off their smoke alarm microwaving soup. He stayed the night, crashing on the couch like he used to in high school when things inside the house got too loud. In the morning, Diane made scrambled eggs and toast, and he brewed the coffee. They sat at the kitchen table and didn't talk about Rebecca. Not once. When he left, he kissed her cheek and pressed a folded paper into her hand. Another sketch. A porch swing with 2 cups resting on the armrest, his initials in the corner. By the second week of October, Diane started locking the back gate at dusk. Not out of fear. Out of routine. She added a motion light near the garage, one that clicked on with a soft mechanical thunk whenever a stray cat wandered too close. She noticed she slept better after that. The house no longer creaked in the same places. The refrigerator hum had become background. The silence was no longer empty. It was hers. The mailbox filled slower now. Junk mail. Catalogs. A thank you note from the library's literacy coordinator with a picture of Diane smiling beside a row of paperbacks. Trey's sketches still showed up. He'd switched to watercolor pencils. Warmer. Softer. One showed a window glowing from the inside. Another, a fence with ivy slowly creeping over the top. Each time she placed them in a drawer in the study. Not to hide, just to keep. And for the first time in years, nothing arrived she hadn't asked for. That night, Diane stood in the doorway of the den, holding a mug of chamomile tea, wrapped in the quilt her mother made before arthritis took her hands. The fireplace was dark. The cat slept curled in the corner. She heard the faint click of the motion light outside. She didn't move. Didn't need to. Then a knock came. Soft, deliberate. 3 taps against the glass of the front door. Not the gate. The door. She stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. And saw it. A single envelope. This one wasn't white. It was red. Her name written in black ink. No return address. The red envelope sat untouched for 3 days. Diane didn't open it. She didn't burn it either. She placed it in a drawer in the front hallway, alongside old warranties and expired coupons. Things once important, now irrelevant. On Monday morning, she brewed strong coffee, tied her hair back, and opened the heavy metal file box she hadn't touched in years. The key stuck, reluctant in the lock. It gave way with a dry click. Inside were the old papers, her original will, power of attorney, the faded printouts from a financial planner she'd stopped seeing after the second appointment. At the time, she hadn't been ready to think about endings. She was now. Trey deserved more than what Rebecca had turned to ash. He deserved steadiness, something to build on. Not just what was left behind. She pulled out a blank legal pad and began rewriting the shape of her future. 2 days later, Cynthia arrived with a leather portfolio under one arm and a knowing glance. The notary had been a neighbor once, lived 2 streets down, drove a boxy Volvo, always brought store-bought cupcakes to the block party but added fresh mint leaves so no one would ask questions. She didn't ask any now either. "Initial here," she said, flipping the page. "Sign there. This line confirms no undue influence." Diane's pen scratched against the paper with deliberate strokes. Everything went to Trey: house, accounts, land rights. With oversight, a small trust set up for maintenance, emergency funds locked behind a double signature clause. Rebecca's name appeared only once, struck through in ink so thick it bled through the page. Cynthia notarized the final document with a nod. Clean, strong, ironclad, she said. Good job. Diane walked her to the door. Thank you. No, Cynthia said, glancing at the wind chimes. Thank you. We don't get to see peace very often, not like this. After Cynthia left, Diane returned to the kitchen. She pulled a cream-colored envelope from the drawer and placed it on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter. Not long, just 2 pages. Carefully worded. Not sentimental, but not cold. Trey, you didn't ask for this, but you stayed anyway. The house is yours now, but the silence too. Don't let either go to waste. There were no instructions, no apologies, just the truth, as she'd finally learned to carry it. She sealed the envelope, wrote his name in blue ink, and slid it into the center drawer of the roll-top desk in the study. He'd find it when the time came, hopefully not soon. That evening, Diane stood in the center of the living room, holding nothing. No papers, no phone, not even a cup of tea. The space was spotless. The walls bare except for a single framed print. Wheat fields under a pale blue sky. The light filtering through the curtains was soft, amber-colored, brushing across the hardwood floor like a memory. The wind rattled the windows. Not hard. Just enough to remind her it was still there. She walked to the front door, checked the deadbolt, then moved to the back gate to ensure it was latched. The new security light flicked on and off once. Motion caught, then cleared. The cat curled up by the fireplace as she passed, flicking its tail once in acknowledgement. She sat down on the couch and let her head fall back against the cushion. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits to be broken, the kind that means done. Then, a soft clack from the mail slot. Diane looked toward the hall. A single piece of mail slid through. No envelope, no stamp. Just a postcard. The front showed a desert highway, empty except for a single gas station. The sky behind it was burning pink, unnatural, and surreal. She turned it over. 3 words in red ink. You forgot me. Diane stood without a word, walked to the front door. And this time, she opened it. Diane didn't speak as the door creaked open. She looked out. Nothing. Just the porch light flickering faintly in the cold dusk air, wind curling through the bushes like it was late for something. The postcard was still in her hand, the red ink bleeding slightly from where her thumb had pressed too long. Then she saw the shape, across the street, near the mailbox, a figure in a heavy coat, hood pulled low, arms folded tight against her ribs. Rebecca. Diane let the door fall shut. She didn't lock it. She didn't need to. She moved back to the window instead, stood just to the side, hidden by the curtain, watching. Rebecca didn't knock right away. She just stood there, unmoving, like she thought the house would shift first, like it always had. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Rebecca paced once, turned a slow, hollow circle on the front walk, looked up at the fur windows. Still nothing. Diane's phone buzzed once. A message from Arlene. Want me to bring out a folding chair? She looks like she's staying. Diane didn't reply. She set the phone on the kitchen counter and went back to the curtain. Rebecca had moved closer now, stood halfway up the path, one boot toe against the first step, her phone in hand. Her shoulders trembled, but Diane couldn't tell if it was cold or fury or both. Another few minutes passed. Then finally, the knock. 3 slow taps. Measured. Familiar. Diane stood still. The cat padded softly into the room, curled around her legs once, then stretched out on the rug like nothing unusual was happening. Another knock. This one louder. Then silence. Rebecca stepped back and pulled out her phone again. She paced in a tight oval by the porch light, staring at the screen like it owed her something. Then she tapped the screen and brought it to her ear. Diane didn't need to guess who she was calling. Inside the drawer, Diane knew the letter to Trey still waited. Outside, the call went unanswered. Rebecca stood there, phone still pressed to her cheek even after the call clearly ended. She didn't redial, didn't scream. She just lowered the phone slowly, looked down at it. The screen had gone dark. Diane watched her daughter's fingers tighten around the phone like she might snap it in half. Instead, Rebecca's shoulders sagged. Not the way they used to when she was being dramatic or playing victim, but the kind of sag that came when the last thread finally snapped. She took one last glance at the house, at the mailbox, at the window. And then she turned, walked slowly down the path, not running, not stomping, just walking, like gravity had grown teeth. She reached the sidewalk, stopped, looked over her shoulder just once. Then she was gone, out of view, phone dead, hands bare, no coat zipped, no plan left. Diane stood still for a long time, long enough for the silence to return in full. Then she reached up and closed the curtain. She didn't check the locks. She didn't reach for her phone. She simply smiled. A small one, barely there. The kind you save for victories that don't need to be spoken aloud. The kind that means, not anymore. The first brushstroke didn't go on clean. The roller skipped, leaving streaks of pale blue across the primer like hesitation made visible. Diane stepped back, adjusted the angle of her hand, and tried again. This time, the paint caught smooth. The walls of Rebecca's old room had been an unyielding lilac since 7th grade. Picked during a tantrum and painted during a truce, it had stayed untouched, unchallenged, for over 2 decades. Now it faded beneath the new color, something cool, calm, the blue of an early sky just before dawn. Trey stood in the doorway, eating crackers straight from the box. "Make it blue, Grandma," he'd said 2 days earlier when she'd asked him to help. Blue doesn't yell. So that's what they did. He took one wall, she took the other. They worked mostly in silence, the only sound the soft shush of the rollers and the occasional rustle of the drop cloth beneath their feet. When they were done, Diane stepped back and looked around. The space felt wider, lighter, like it could breathe again. She stripped the bedding next, pulled the old floral comforter into a trash bag, tossed in the pillows, the faded stuffed owl still clinging to the corner of the headboard. The nameplate came off the door with 2 clean turns of a screwdriver. Rebecca's room, gold lettering on a fake wood plaque. It clattered into the donation box without ceremony. Arlene arrived mid-afternoon, wearing a windbreaker that didn't match her pants and carrying a thermos full of spiced cider. "Bribery," she said, handing Diane a mug and flopping onto the newly made bed. "And neighborhood updates. The Schumacher's dog got into the Halloween decorations again, ate a glow stick, lit up like a rave balloon." Diane chuckled, curling her fingers around the mug. "Is it wrong that I'm not surprised?" Arlene grinned. "Only if you admit it out loud." They drank in silence for a moment, watching the late October sun drift lazily across the now blue walls. "You done with it?" Arlene asked finally, nodding toward the corner where the old dresser used to stand. "Almost," Diane said. "Just a few last things to file away." Arlene sipped, then said softly, "Good. You deserve the rest." Mark came by the next day with the final documents, everything polished and official. The man was always punctual, always polite. But today, his voice had a note of finality Diane hadn't heard before. "The trust is fully operational now," he said, setting a leather folder on the dining room table. "All assets are in, all terms active. Trey's oversight is in place, and the legal framework is closed. No contest allowed. Diane nodded. And the contingency clause? He flipped to a tabbed page and tapped it. Only applicable in case of unnecessary contact or conflict. But you already knew that. She did. It was her idea. I'll leave the originals with you, he said, sliding the folder toward her. No need to meet again unless something changes. Nothing will, Diane replied. He smiled faintly, respectful and distant. That's what peace looks like then. That night, Diane pulled open the top drawer of the old roll-top desk. Inside were Trey's drawings, folded with care, the letter she'd written him. And now, the final folder from Mark. She placed it in the drawer beside the rest, then reached for the red envelope, the one Rebecca had dropped weeks ago. She hadn't looked at it again, still hadn't opened it. She turned it once in her hands, studied the postmark, the software on the flap. Then she slid it into the drawer, flat and untouched. She locked it. The key clicked sharp and certain. The house felt different now, not just clean, but claimed. The front door had a new lock. So did the gate. She'd replaced the mailbox, too. The new one was simple, narrow, no room for what didn't belong. Outside, dusk settled early. October knew how to arrive with purpose. Diane stood by the living room window, tea in hand, watching the last light stretch long and thin across the porch steps. The wind picked up. The chimes on Arlene's porch rattled once. The cat lifted its head. Diane turned away from the window, and behind her, outside, unseen. A car idled, engine low, lights off, waiting. The candles on the cake were crooked. Not in a sad, rushed way, just real, just human. Diane smoothed the edge of the tablecloth, straightened the napkins, then caught herself. Trey was already mid-laugh, deep in conversation with Arlene over something ridiculous involving marshmallows and science class. There were 6 of them around the table. Just enough for laughter to echo, not enough to drown in. Trey turned 10 that Saturday. He wore a paper crown Arlene had brought from the dollar store and a hoodie 2 sizes too big. Diane had offered to fix it, but he shrugged. I'll grow into it, he'd said. That felt true. The dining room glowed warm with late afternoon light. Diane had strung paper stars across the windows and baked a sheet cake from scratch, chocolate with orange frosting, Trey's request. No balloons, no noise machines, just voices. Real ones. After cake, while the others filtered into the living room to play cards or sip cider, Diane sat beside Trey on the steps that led down to the den. "Want to hear a story?" she asked. He nodded, still licking frosting from his thumb. She took a breath. "When your mom was your age, she wanted to be a magician." His eyes widened. "Seriously?" "She made me sit on the couch for hours while she practiced, kept asking the cat to disappear. He never did, but he ran away once and she swore it counted." Trey grinned. "Did she wear a cape?" "A towel," Diane said, smiling softly, "with safety pins and glitter." He was quiet for a moment. Was she nice back then? Diane didn't rush the answer. She was complicated. She was funny and bold. And sometimes she wanted things so badly it made her hard to be around. But she loved her tricks. And she loved trying to make people look twice. Trey stared at the cake plate in his lap. "I wish I remembered her better." "You will," Diane said gently. "Just not all at once." She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. "For me?" She nodded. He tore the paper, lifted the lid. Inside was a key. Brass, cool to the touch. "It's not for a toy," she said. "It's for the front door." His eyebrows lifted. "You're giving me a key to your house?" "No," she said, leaning in close. "I'm giving you a key to your house." That night, after the last guest had gone and the dishes were stacked neatly in the sink, Diane curled into her reading chair with a book and a blanket. She didn't check the locks again, didn't scan the street. The car that had idled in the dark 2 nights earlier hadn't returned. Maybe it never would. The cat stretched across the windowsill. Outside, frost began to touch the grass, pale silver threads weaving into the blades. She turned a page, read it twice. Not because her mind wandered, but because she had the time. For the first time in what felt like decades, she wasn't waiting. Not for a door to slam or a voice to rise, or a past to press its weight against her ribs. Just the story, just the stillness. In the morning, the cold met her like a friend. She stepped outside barefoot, the wood of the porch sharp with frost. Her breath came out in soft clouds. The air was bright, bright in that crisp, bone-deep way that only comes at the edge of winter. Across the street, Arlene stood in her driveway, bundled in a massive coat with coffee in hand. She waved. Diane raised her own hand in return, fingers red at the tips but unbothered. The world was quiet, but not hollow. The kind of quiet she had earned. The kind that made her feel like the air itself had stepped back to give her space. She looked at the yard, the trimmed edges, the paint still fresh on the porch rail, the faint glint of Trey's new key on the kitchen hook, and she whispered aloud, just once, just for herself. She said I was just waiting to rot, but I was finally blooming.